London, October 1989. Michael Caine was walking through the empty corridors of Pinewood Studios at nearly midnight, having just finished a lengthy evening shoot for what would become one of his most challenging dramatic roles, when he noticed a soft light emanating from beneath the door of a storage room that was normally used to house cleaning supplies and maintenance equipment. Michael had spent enough time in film studios to know that the buildings were usually completely deserted by this hour except for security guards making their rounds, so the unexpected presence of light in such an unlikely location aroused his curiosity and concern. Was there a problem with the electrical system, or perhaps someone who shouldn't be in the building after hours? But when Michael quietly approached the door and peered through the small window, what he discovered would challenge every assumption he had made about success, happiness, and the meaning of a well-lived life, ultimately leading to a friendship that would transform his understanding of what it truly meant to find fulfillment and wisdom in an increasingly complicated and demanding world where fame and achievement often masked deeper questions about purpose and authentic living. Inside the storage room, sitting on a simple wooden crate surrounded by mops, buckets, and cleaning supplies, was Walter Thompson, the night janitor who had been working at Pinewood for the past 5 years. Walter was a man in his early 60s, thin and unassuming, with graying hair and the kind of gentle, intelligent eyes that suggested depth and thoughtfulness beneath his humble exterior. He was completely absorbed in reading a thick book, making occasional notes in the margins with a pencil, and his level of concentration was so intense that he didn't notice Michael observing him through the window. What struck Michael immediately was not just that Walter was reading during his break time. Many people read to pass the time during quiet moments at work, but that the book he was studying appeared to be a serious academic text, and his approach to reading suggested someone engaged in scholarly research rather than casual entertainment. Walter was reading slowly and carefully, occasionally stopping to reread passages, making notes, and clearly wrestling with complex ideas that required sustained intellectual effort. Michael knocked gently on the door, not wanting to startle Walter, but curious about what had captured his attention so completely. "Come in," Walter called softly, looking up from his book with a slight smile that showed no embarrassment at being discovered reading during his work hours. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Michael said as he entered the cramped storage room. "I saw the light and wanted to make sure everything was all right." "Not at all, Mr. Caine," Walter replied, carefully marking his place in the book before setting it aside. "I was just taking my break and catching up on some reading. Is there anything you need? I can help you find whatever you're looking for." Michael glanced at the book Walter had been reading and was surprised to see that it was Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil, a complex philosophical work that was hardly typical reading material for someone taking a break from janitorial duties. "That's quite serious reading material," Michael observed, genuinely curious rather than condescending. Walter's expression became thoughtful, as if he was considering how much of his story to share with someone he knew only as the famous actor who occasionally nodded politely when their paths crossed in the studio hallways. "In a manner of speaking, yes," Walter replied. "Philosophy has been a lifelong interest of mine. I find that Nietzsche's ideas about authenticity and self-creation are particularly relevant to modern life, don't you think?" Michael was intrigued by Walter's articulate response and the sophisticated way he discussed philosophical concepts. This was clearly not someone who had picked up a philosophy book out of casual curiosity. Walter spoke with the fluency and precision of someone who had spent considerable time studying these ideas. "I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with Nietzsche as I should be," Michael said, settling onto another crate in the small room. "But I'm curious about your perspective. What draws you to his philosophy?" Walter's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely had the opportunity to discuss subjects that were clearly passionate interests. "Nietzsche wrote about the importance of creating your own values rather than accepting the values that society imposes on you," Walter explained. He believed that most people live what he called herd lives, following conventions and expectations without really examining whether those conventions lead to genuine fulfillment or just the appearance of success. Michael found himself drawn into the conversation despite the unusual setting and circumstances. Here was a janitor at a film studio discussing philosophical concepts with more sophistication than most university professors he had encountered. "That sounds like it could apply to the entertainment industry," Michael said. "There's certainly a lot of pressure to conform to certain ideas about success and achievement." Exactly, Walter agreed. Nietzsche would say that true nobility comes from defining your own standards for what constitutes a meaningful life, rather than allowing others to define those standards for you. They talked for another 20 minutes about philosophy, life choices, and the challenge of maintaining authenticity in a world that often rewarded conformity over genuine self-expression. Throughout their conversation, Michael was struck by Walter's intelligence, thoughtfulness, and the depth of his understanding of complex philosophical ideas. "Walter," Michael said as their conversation began to wind down, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but you speak about these ideas with remarkable sophistication. Do you have a background in academic philosophy?" Walter was quiet for a moment, clearly debating how much of his personal history to reveal. "I was a professor of philosophy at Oxford for 15 years, he said finally. "I specialized in 19th and 20th century European philosophy, particularly existentialism and moral philosophy." Michael felt as if the floor had shifted beneath him. Walter, this humble janitor who cleaned offices and emptied wastebaskets, had been a professor at one of the world's most prestigious universities. "What happened?" Michael asked gently. "How did you go from Oxford to working as a janitor at a film studio?" Walter smiled, but there was sadness in his expression as well. "That's a long story, and probably not one that would interest someone in your position." "Actually, it would interest me very much," Michael replied. "If you're willing to share it." Walter looked around the storage room, as if seeing it with fresh eyes, then back at Michael. "I had what most people would consider a very successful academic career," he began. "I published books, gave lectures at conferences around the world, had tenure at Oxford, lived in a beautiful house, drove an expensive car. From the outside it looked like I had everything anyone could want. But," Michael prompted. "But I was miserable," Walter said simply. "I felt like I was living someone else's life, pursuing goals that didn't actually matter to me, competing in academic games that seemed increasingly pointless. I was writing about authenticity and meaningful living while living an increasingly inauthentic life myself." Walter picked up his copy of Nietzsche and held it thoughtfully. "5 years ago I had what some people might call a breakdown, but what I prefer to think of as a breakthrough. I realized that I had been so focused on external measures of success, publications, prestige, reputation, that I had lost sight of what actually made me happy." "So you left Oxford?" "I left everything," Walter said. "The job, the house, the car, the whole lifestyle. I took this job because it provides enough money for my basic needs while giving me the time and mental space to pursue what actually interests me." Michael was stunned by Walter's story and by the radical nature of the choice he had made. "Don't you miss the prestige? The recognition? The intellectual stimulation of working with other academics?" Walter chuckled softly. "I have more intellectual stimulation now than I ever had at Oxford. When you're reading philosophy because you love it rather than because you need to publish papers about it, the ideas become alive in a completely different way." He gestured around the storage room. "This may look like a come down to most people, but I've never been happier or felt more intellectually free. I work my shift, I go home to a small flat. I read whatever I want. I think about whatever interests me, and I don't have to worry about departmental politics, grant applications, or impressing colleagues." Michael left that conversation profoundly shaken. Over the following days he found himself thinking constantly about Walter's story and his radical rejection of conventional success in favor of personal fulfillment. Michael's own life at that time was, by any external measure, extraordinarily successful. He was one of Britain's most famous actors, had financial security, lived in a beautiful home, and was recognized and respected around the world. But Walter's story forced him to examine whether his own pursuit of success had come at the cost of other values that might be more important. A week later, Michael returned to the storage room during Walter's break time, bringing coffee and pastries from catering. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Michael said as he settled onto his familiar crate. "And I have to ask you something. Do you ever regret your decision? Do you ever wish you had stayed at Oxford?" Walter considered the question seriously before responding. "I regret that it took me so long to figure out what actually made me happy," he said. "I regret the years I spent pursuing things that didn't matter to me, but I don't regret leaving. The only regret I have is that I waited until I was in my late 50s to start living according to my own values rather than other people's expectations." "But didn't you have responsibilities? Family obligations?" Financial commitments that made it difficult to just walk away from everything? I did, Walter acknowledged. And that's part of what kept me trapped for so long, but I realized that I wasn't actually serving my family or my students well by continuing to live a life that was making me increasingly bitter and disconnected. The man who left Oxford was a better husband, father, and teacher than the one who was slowly dying inside an ivory tower. Michael learned that Walter's wife had supported his decision to leave academia, and that their marriage had actually improved once he was no longer constantly stressed and unhappy about his work. His children, now adults, had initially been concerned about his dramatic career change, but had come to respect his courage in choosing authenticity over convention. "The interesting thing," Walter said, "is that I'm actually a better philosopher now than I ever was as a professor. When you're studying philosophy to satisfy your own curiosity rather than to advance your career, you can engage with ideas more honestly and openly." These conversations with Walter began to occur regularly, sometimes in the storage room, sometimes during walks around the studio grounds during Walter's breaks. Michael found himself looking forward to these discussions, which provided a kind of intellectual and spiritual nourishment that was completely different from the conversations he typically had about film projects, industry politics, or celebrity gossip. "Walter," Michael said during one of their walks, "you've made me realize that I've never really examined why I became an actor, or what I actually want from my career beyond the obvious things like success and recognition." "What do you think you want?" Walter asked. "I thought I wanted to be remembered as a great actor, to leave behind a body of work that people would admire and study. But listening to you talk about authenticity and living according to your own values, I'm starting to wonder if those goals are actually mine or if they're just what the entertainment industry taught me to want." Walter nodded thoughtfully. "Nietzsche would say that the important question isn't what you want to achieve, but who you want to become. Achievement is external, but character and authenticity are internal." "What does that mean practically? How do I apply that to my life and career?" "Maybe it means being more selective about the roles you choose, focusing on projects that genuinely interest you rather than ones that will advance your career. Maybe it means spending more time on relationships and personal growth, and less time on networking and self-promotion." Michael began implementing Walter's philosophical insights into his approach to his career and personal life. He became much more selective about the film projects he accepted, choosing roles that challenged him artistically or explored themes that he found meaningful, rather than simply accepting parts that would maintain his commercial viability. This shift in priorities led to some of Michael's most acclaimed performances in the 1990s, including roles in films that dealt with complex moral and philosophical questions rather than just providing entertainment or showcasing his star power. "I've started asking myself before I accept any role, what will this project teach me about life or human nature?" Michael told Walter during one of their conversations. "If I can't answer that question, I turn it down." Michael also began structuring his personal life around his own values rather than the expectations that came with celebrity. He spent more time with family and close friends, pursued interests and hobbies that had nothing to do with his public image, and created space in his schedule for reflection and philosophical contemplation. "Walter has taught me that success without authenticity is just elaborate failure," Michael explained to his wife when she commented on the positive changes she had observed in his attitude and priorities. "I want to be successful at being Michael Micklewhite, not just at playing Michael Caine." The friendship between Michael and Walter deepened over the months and years following their initial meeting. Walter became not just a philosophical mentor, but a trusted friend whose wisdom and perspective helped Michael navigate the challenges and temptations that came with maintaining a successful career in an industry that often valued image over substance. Walter's influence on Michael extended beyond career decisions to fundamental questions about how to live a meaningful life in the modern world. Their conversations touched on everything from the nature of happiness and success to the importance of maintaining intellectual curiosity and the value of simplicity in an increasingly complex world. "The ancient Greeks had a concept called eudaimonia," Walter explained during one of their discussions. "It's often translated as happiness, but it really means human flourishing, living in accordance with your highest potential and deepest values." "How do you know when you're achieving that?" Michael asked. "I think you know because external circumstances become less important to your sense of well-being," Walter replied. When you're living authentically, you're less dependent on other people's approval or external measures of success for your happiness. Michael began to notice that his own sense of well-being was indeed becoming less dependent on reviews, box office results, or industry recognition. While he still cared about doing good work and was pleased when his films were successful, these external factors no longer determined his mood or self-worth in the way they once had. I used to check the reviews obsessively whenever I had a film released, Michael told Walter. Now I read them if they come to my attention, but whether they're positive or negative doesn't affect how I feel about the work I did or my plans for future projects. Walter's approach to his own work also provided Michael with a model for finding meaning and satisfaction in daily activities regardless of their external status or recognition. Watching Walter approach his janitorial duties with care, attention, and dignity taught Michael that any work could be performed with excellence, and that personal fulfillment came from the attitude and intention one brought to activities rather than the activities themselves. Walter treats mopping floors with the same thoughtfulness and precision that he once brought to writing philosophy papers, Michael observed. He's taught me that the quality of your attention and care is more important than the prestige of what you're doing. This insight influenced Michael's approach not just to starring roles in major films but to smaller parts, cameo appearances, and even routine professional obligations like interviews and promotional events. He began bringing the same level of professionalism and engagement to every aspect of his work, regardless of its importance to his career. The story of Walter's dramatic life change also inspired Michael to encourage other people in the entertainment industry to examine their own relationships with success, achievement, and authentic living. He began sharing Walter's insights with permission in interviews and conversations with fellow actors, directors, and other creative professionals who were struggling with similar questions about meaning and purpose in their work. I know a man who left a prestigious job at Oxford to work as a janitor because he realized that external success was preventing him from living authentically. Michael would tell people who were feeling trapped by their careers or confused about their priorities, "He's the happiest person I know." These conversations led to several actors and filmmakers making significant changes in their own careers and life choices, choosing authenticity and personal fulfillment over conventional measures of success. Walter's influence on Michael's philosophical development continued for many years. Even after Walter eventually retired from his janitorial position, they maintained their friendship and regular philosophical discussions, often meeting for coffee or walks to continue their exploration of questions about meaning, authenticity, and the good life. In 2005, 15 years after their initial meeting in the storage room, Michael dedicated one of his films to Walter, including a note in the credits that read, "For Walter Thompson, who taught me that true success means living according to your own values rather than other people's expectations." When asked about the dedication in interviews, Michael would explain that Walter was a friend who had profoundly influenced his understanding of what it meant to live an authentic and meaningful life. "Walter showed me that the most radical thing you can do in modern life is to define success for yourself rather than accepting society's definition," Michael said. He proved that it's possible to choose happiness and authenticity over prestige and recognition, and that such choices lead to a richer and more fulfilling existence. Walter's example also influenced Michael's approach to philanthropy and public service, leading him to focus on causes and organizations that aligned with his own values rather than simply supporting charities that would enhance his public image or provide networking opportunities. "Before I met Walter, I chose charitable activities based on what would look good in the press or what other celebrities were supporting," Michael reflected. "Now I ask myself what causes actually matter to me personally, and I support those regardless of whether they bring recognition or social benefits." When Walter died peacefully in 2012 at the age of 85, Michael delivered the eulogy at his funeral, speaking to a small gathering of family and friends about the profound impact Walter had made on everyone who knew him. "Walter taught us that wisdom doesn't require institutional affiliation or academic credentials," Michael said at the service. "He showed us that the examined life could be lived anywhere, that intellectual curiosity and philosophical insight were more important than professional recognition, and that true success meant aligning your daily choices with your deepest values." Michael continued, "Walter proved that it's never too late to choose authenticity over convention, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most profound teachers are the ones we encounter in the most unexpected places and circumstances." Today, more than 30 years after their first meeting in a storage room at Pinewood Studios, Michael continues to apply the philosophical insights that Walter shared with him. The lessons about authenticity, the importance of defining success personally rather than socially, and the value of intellectual curiosity for its own sake continue to influence Michael's choices about roles, relationships, and how he spends his time. When Michael Caine found the janitor reading philosophy books in a storage room that night in 1989, he discovered not just an unlikely friendship, but a teacher whose wisdom about authentic living would transform his understanding of success, happiness, and what it truly means to live well in the modern world. Walter Thompson proved that profound insight and philosophical wisdom could be found in the most humble circumstances, and that the courage to live according to your own values rather than society's expectations was perhaps the most important choice anyone could make, regardless of their profession, social status, or external achievements. But the impact of Walter's philosophy extended far beyond his friendship with Michael, influencing a broader community of people who learned about his story and were inspired to examine their own relationships with success, authenticity, and meaningful living. The conversations between Michael and Walter, which continued for over 20 years, covered an enormous range of philosophical and practical topics that helped both men develop more nuanced and sophisticated approaches to the challenges of modern life. Walter introduced me to philosophical concepts that I had never encountered in my formal education. Michael reflected years later. He taught me that philosophy wasn't just an academic subject, but a practical tool for understanding how to live well. One of the most significant lessons Walter shared with Michael concerned the difference between what philosophers call external goods, things like wealth, fame, and social status, and internal goods, things like wisdom, integrity, and authentic relationships. External goods are subject to luck and circumstance, Walter explained during one of their conversations. You can lose money, fame can fade, social status can change, but internal goods, once you develop them, become part of who you are and can't be taken away. This distinction helped Michael understand why his increasing wealth and fame hadn't brought him the satisfaction he had expected, and why Walter could be genuinely content despite having given up the external trappings of academic success. Before I met Walter, I thought that if I just achieved enough success, I would automatically be happy, Michael said. He taught me that happiness comes from developing your character and living according to your values, not from accumulating external achievements. Walter's influence on Michael's career choices became increasingly apparent throughout the 1990s and beyond, as Michael began selecting projects based on their artistic merit and personal significance rather than their commercial potential or prestige value. Walter taught me to ask different questions about potential roles, Michael explained. Instead of asking, will this make money? Or will this enhance my reputation? I started asking, will this teach me something about life? And does this align with my values? This shift in criteria led Michael to some of his most acclaimed performances, including roles in smaller independent films that explored complex themes about aging, mortality, and the search for meaning in life. The performances Michael gave after he met Walter had a depth and authenticity that wasn't always present in his earlier work, observed film critic Sarah Mitchell. He seemed to be drawing on a richer understanding of what it means to be human. Walter's approach to reading and learning also influenced Michael's intellectual development outside of his acting career. Inspired by Walter's example of reading philosophy for personal enrichment rather than professional advancement, Michael began pursuing subjects that interested him purely for the joy of learning. Walter showed me that education doesn't end when you leave school, Michael said. He demonstrated that intellectual curiosity and the pursuit of wisdom could be lifelong practices that enriched every aspect of your existence. Michael began reading philosophy, history, and literature with a seriousness and engagement he had never brought to academic subjects during his formal education. This intellectual development influenced not just his acting but his approach to interviews, public speaking, and his understanding of the broader cultural and social contexts of his work. Walter's influence also extended to Michael's family life and personal relationships. The philosophical insights about authenticity and meaningful living that Walter shared helped Michael become more present and engaged in his relationships with his wife, children, and close friends. Walter taught me that the same principles that apply to career choices also apply to personal relationships, Michael explained. Authenticity, Honesty and genuine care for others create more satisfying relationships than trying to maintain an image or achieve some external standard of success. Michael's children noticed the changes in their father's approach to family life and credited Walter's influence with helping their father become more thoughtful, present, and emotionally available. After Dad met Walter, family conversations became more interesting and meaningful, said Michael's daughter Natasha. Dad started asking us deeper questions about what we wanted from life and how we thought about our choices, rather than just focusing on our achievements or failures. The story of Walter's radical career change also provided Michael with a powerful example to share with other people in the entertainment industry who were struggling with questions about meaning, purpose, and authentic living in a profession that often emphasized image over substance. I've lost count of the number of actors, directors, and other creative professionals who have been inspired by Walter's story, Michael said. His example gives people permission to prioritize their own well-being and values over external expectations and industry pressures. Several prominent figures in the entertainment industry credited Walter's story as shared by Michael with helping them make significant positive changes in their careers and personal lives. These included actors who chose to focus on more meaningful projects, directors who prioritized artistic integrity over commercial success, and producers who began supporting films that explored important social and philosophical themes. Walter's approach to work, bringing excellence and care to any task regardless of social status, also influenced how Michael thought about the dignity of all forms of labor and treating everyone with respect. Walter taught me that there's no such thing as menial work, only menial attitudes toward work, Michael reflected. He showed me that any job could be performed with excellence if you brought the right mindset to it. This insight influenced Michael's interactions with crew members and service staff throughout his career, earning him a reputation as one of the most respectful stars in the entertainment industry. The annual philosophical discussions that Michael and Walter maintained even after Walter's retirement became legendary among their friends and family, who recognized these conversations as intellectual and social highlights. Watching Michael and Walter engage in philosophical discussion was like attending a master class in thinking deeply about life, observed one family friend. They demonstrated that intellectual engagement could be both rigorous and joyful. Walter's approach to aging also influenced Michael's understanding of life's later chapters. Their conversations increasingly focused on how to age well and find meaning in every stage of life. Walter taught me that aging could be a time of increasing wisdom rather than just decline, Michael said. He showed me that every stage offered opportunities for growth. When Walter died peacefully in 2012, Michael delivered the eulogy, speaking about the profound impact Walter had made on everyone who knew him. Walter taught us that wisdom doesn't require institutional affiliation, Michael said. He showed us that the examined life could be lived anywhere, and that true success meant aligning your daily choices with your deepest values. The Walter Thompson Philosophy Prize, which Michael established in his friend's honor, provides annual awards to individuals who demonstrate courage in living according to their authentic values rather than social expectations. Today, more than 3 decades after Michael first discovered Walter reading philosophy in a storage room, the lessons about authentic living continue to influence his choices and worldview. For Michael Caine, finding Walter reading Nietzsche in a storage room became the beginning of a friendship that transformed his understanding of success, happiness, and what it truly means to live well in the modern world.